officers respond to the shooting, 14300 East Alameda Avenue.
The World Trade Center, tower number 1 is on fire. The whole outside of the building was just a huge explosion.
You're listening to Be the Hero podcast, brought to you by Heroes Behind the Line, where we break the stigma of silence around PTSD and mental health. Are you a first responder in need or just want to talk? Send us a message on Facebook, Heroes Behind the Line or Be the Hero podcast, and welcome to the show.
Somebody is still shooting inside theater number 9 for an employee.
Welcome everybody to the show. Today we got a little bit of a special show for everybody. Got a good friend of mine. Well, I don't know if I'd really call him too much of a good friend, just somebody I got to know a little intimately a little bit recently.
Very intimately.
Yeah. That was an interesting couple of weeks ago.
It was indeed. Like I had to show my lieutenant where you touched me on the doll.
You know, I didn't think about that much afterwards, but yeah, there was a lot of things that I wasn't so proud of after that week.
No. In fact, I think a lot of them start off at Class A misdemeanors.
But I do say that was probably one of the most fun trainings I've taken in a long time.
I loved every minute of it, except for some of the groin strikes. But no, it was definitely the most intense as well. I've never learned so much and been brutalized so much at the same time.
And now we're actually talking about a Krav Maga course that was put on by the Attorney General here in Arkansas. We had Nir Maman came in, he instructed the course. What was your take on Nir? Because I thought he was awesome.
So at the beginning, to be honest, I was a little taken aback. I thought, okay, there's a little too much bravado, like maybe it's covering something, but no. It was everything he purported himself to be. He's quite impressive. And then the more I looked into some of his past and his background, he's pretty legit.
So did you go down the rabbit hole like I did? I think about the second or third day I started like stalking him on Facebook, just kind of going down the rabbit hole and going, oh shit, this guy knows his stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And in fact, to the point where I got past the stalking, I was like, I need to see more, and there's limited access. So I went ahead and sent him the friend request.
As you probably did about the same thing. I'm thinking if we were doing the same thing, I'm probably assuming everybody in the class was doing the same thing.
I think so too. I just had to. I made that. I didn't make any rookie mistakes, so I didn't like any photos from like 6 years ago. Or
I think I made some of those mistakes. I went down that rabbit hole pretty deep. I'm like, ooh, look at this stuff from 1990.
No, yeah, and then I even got off on a tangent, and now I'm friends with the rabbi that punched me in the crotch from L.A. So
Yossi, I think.
Yossi,
Yeah,
yep.
Yossi. Yeah, he's really cool. I mean, I looked into his little program he has out in California, and that's a pretty impressive program.
Yeah,
and he's built that from the ground up.
So I didn't know that he was like the founder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe that's what he was telling me. He founded it, and that's his nonprofit that he's in charge of. So.
It's a really cool program, and what was cool is like him as the rabbi that beat you up a little bit in class, but then you see like it's almost like my playlist when I'm at the gym. You know, there's a little bit of Christian, a little bit of rock, and then some trap music, and you never know you never know how it's going to mesh, but that's how it was looking at his photos too, because there you see him in like the not quite the Hasidic outfits, but then the very next picture was him in an MMA ring, like pounding somebody into the mat. I was like, what's going on here?
Like, this is not what you typically think of a rabbi.
No. So, but he let me know that most beer is kosher. So if you didn't know that there's kosher beer, most beer is kosher, and he can drink it. That's
awesome. That's a great thing to know as a rabbi. It's all kosher beer, and you can drink it all.
All of it.
So I know we just skipped over. We kind of got on a little tangent there for a second. Tell the folks who you are.
That's the trick question. Like, who am I, or what am I? Or?
I mean, not what do you think you are. It's like, who are you as a person? What's your government name?
Yeah, my government name is Eli Keller. I'm currently a sergeant with the Maumelle Police Department, and I'm over the School Resource Officer Division. And then I also do the defensive tactics, firearms, and as needed professional standards.
Nice. So you said you're over the School Resource Officer?
Yes.
Yes.
So I'm currently a school resource officer, but I'm also the supervisor for the division.
Okay.
So we have officers at all the schools in the city of Maumelle, the 3 Pulaski County schools and the 1 charter school.
Nice. So you oversee all the operations as far as with all the school resource officers throughout this area?
Correct.
That's awesome. I mean, it's kind of the funny thing when I first met you at the course when we were doing the Krav Maga stuff. My interpretation always before when I thought of school resource officer, I always thought being in a law enforcement myself, I was like, school resource officer is where you go when you're about to retire, and you expect the school resource officer to be like this guy that just either he's, a couple years from retirement and he doesn't really care too much anymore. And then I met you and I found out you were a school resource officer. I'm like, wait a minute, hold on a second. Because this guy seems like he's like really squared away, got his stuff together. He's cool as hell. He's funny as hell. And this is in a more personal setting because we're out in that course. I didn't actually get to come and see you here at the school. And then I come to the school to actually meet with you here today. And just seeing how you connect with some of these kids, I'm like, holy crap, this is a whole different level of what I thought a school resource officer was, because these kids love you. I mean, they literally were coming up to you, and I'm like, this is not what I expected from a school resource officer. I remember when I was in middle school and high school, my school resource officers, they were good. I knew who they were, and I liked them. But I wasn't like that with my school resource officer. I mean, these kids coming up to you, hugging you, and that's great. Because you're the first experience they get with law enforcement. And I really, that changed some of my thought process on school resource officers is if they see it in a school and they interact with you that way, hopefully that builds that relationship with them that later on when they leave school and they go into something else, they're not in fear of, oh, if I call law enforcement, I got to listen to what the media is telling me, and it's these bad things about law enforcement. And they've seen that with you firsthand, that's not how it is.
Right. And so I'm a little unorthodox.
Just a little.
Just a little. I might blur some boundary lines that people would typically place on a police officer in a role like this. And whenever anybody asks me, like with the whole hugging thing, is I really, with that, I try to do the side hug. For the most part, some kids, they're on you too quick, even with your situational awareness, like they're on you and it's like a full hug. And it did make me uncomfortable in the beginning. And there were people that even commented, like some parents in the car line or, somebody at work, like, bro, you need to be careful hugging these kids. And so I did what I normally do. This is like 9 years ago.
That's when you first got into school resource?
Correct. I just transferred out of criminal investigations. Okay. And promoted into sergeant, and that's where the opening was. And so I did what any grown man does: is I called my mom and asked for advice. And luckily, and it kind of goes into what y'all are doing. Like, and I love what you're doing with this program. Is my parents always raised me up to like, don't ever lie. If you don't know, ask somebody, but always reach out for help.
Yeah.
You've always got those lifelines. As long as you've networked, you've always got people that you can call on to help you. And so I called my mom and I was like, I got kind of a dilemma, like people are saying I should be more careful the way these kids hug me or the way I hug them back. Obviously the way I hug them back, I can control, but she made it a point. She said that not all of those kids come from good homes, and you don't know which ones like come from a good home or which ones don't. You can't judge a kid's home by his race or her race or gender, religion, because that transcends everything, right? Parenting.
And they kind of put on that metaphorical mask when some of them, when they come to school, if they're dealing with something, you may not know they're putting that smile on.
Exactly. Until you know that kid's baseline, you might not know their body language or facial expressions. And she said something that just stuck out to me was, that might be the only hug that kid gets today.
Yeah.
And so like I've really embraced that attitude for every interaction with the kids is it's just taking that extra step because you don't know what that kid's going through. And it really started when I was at the elementary. There was a kid, he was probably in like 4th or 5th grade. And, I'm giving all the kids high fives as they're getting out of the cars. And, I'm feeling myself a little big head because all the kids are so excited. They don't even know me yet, but they're acting like I'm the coolest. And there's this one kid who gets out of the car and he starts walking up. I'm like, what's up, bro? And like I go to give him the fist bump and he shakes his head. Mm-hmm. And he said, I don't like the cops. And so my gut reaction, I'm still fresh out of CID. You kind of got that mentality that everybody's bad. And I said, well, that's all right. Cops probably don't like you, and I laugh and the kids around us laugh. He didn't laugh.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. He probably didn't take that as well.
No, he didn't. And that stuck with me all night. Like, I hated myself for saying that. Like, even, and it goes back to know your audience. Like, I'm a joker, you're a joker. And
it's that little thing that could be the changing factor for him for not maybe for the entire life, but it could change just a slight bit of his thought process on how he deals with things. Is just saying, hey, that cop was a jerk to me. I'm going to be a jerk, continue to be a jerk to cops.
Right. And really in his mind, I just validated every
thoughts.
Negative thought that he's had about the police.
Exactly.
So the next day I see him get out of the car and I beeline for him and I go to give him a high five and he shakes his head no. And I said, that's all right. You know what, bro? I'm sorry about yesterday. I shouldn't have said that. And I still got your back. And he said, all right, whatever. And he kept going. So every day I saw that kid, I went to give him a high five or a fist bump with the expectation I wasn't going to get it back.
Yeah.
And I became a champ at, giving myself, like, closing the gap. But no, I was like, every day I tell him, like, that's all right, bro. I'm still here for you. Or I'd spice it up. I'm like, man, you know what? That's all right, bro, but I got you. I'd take a bullet for you.
Yeah.
And I just kept this up. In about 3 months, it was almost
persistence.
Like, yes. Well, I owed it to that kid.
Exactly. Persistence is key. That's a good thing.
Yeah. And so it was it was close to Christmas break, and I go to give him a fist bump, and I'm getting ready to say, some like witty remark, and he hits my fist.
Wow.
And I said, oh my gosh. I said, bro. And he goes, don't make a big deal about it. And he keeps walking.
And I'm sure you're overcome with feeling at that point. Like, I can't believe I finally got this.
Yes. And like,
it's an accomplishment.
But I can't share it with anybody because we're first responders and we don't talk about our feelings.
But that's what we're here to do. We're here on this show is actually to talk about our feelings and get these things out because we are people too. We deal with things. We see things in our line of work. I mean, the police, firemen, the EMS guys. We see a lot of things in our work, and we have to deal with these traumas that we're dealing with. And the best way to deal with them is finding somebody to talk to, find somebody that can relate to, hey, this is the stuff I've been going through. You're not alone in a lot of it. And pretty much all of it, you're not alone. I mean, you've gone through some stuff that I'm sure I've gone through, and if we were starting to talk, we would realize these similarities they're there. So we can easily have some of those similarities. I mean, so you've been in resource now, or school resource, for 9 years. How long have you been in law enforcement?
Law enforcement, I'm starting my 17th year. I started my 17th year in August.
And you look great for 60.
Stop.
And just so everybody knows is listening to this, the reason I say that he looks great for 60 is because it is his 60th birthday today. He retires in 2 years. This is insane. He looks like he's 29 years old and he retires in 2 years because he's 60. No, I'm just kidding. You're 45
today.
That's right. Well, happy birthday.
I'm not going to knock your math because you are from Jefferson County.
Yeah, my math is horrible. I will be the first to admit that I cannot. If you ask me what 1 + 1 is, I'm usually like 5. Yeah. I think it's 5, and I usually have to pull out a calculator. And, my teachers in school, which funny, we always go back to school since I'm here in a school with you, is my teachers told me that I would never have a calculator in my pocket. And that was always my thing. Every time I went to a math class as a kid, there was something about numbers. I could not figure them out. And my teachers were like, you need to figure these numbers out. You will never have a calculator with you at all times. Little do you know, I have a calculator with me all the time now.
Exactly. I've got one on my watch, and I've got a supercomputer in my pocket.
Exactly. I've got a better computer than you. I don't even remember what her name was, but I'm like, I got a better computer than you now.
Your little black and white IBM.
And then you're playing Oregon Trail.
Oh, my gosh. I don't know how many times I caught malaria on that. And I'm like, we don't even have malaria in the U.S.
Died of dysentery.
Yes.
Hey, but that was a great game. I do remember going to like computer library or a computer class or something like that. And I think it was elementary school or middle school. And That was like the big thing that everybody was like, oh, I got to go get on the Oregon Trail. I got to go get this. And you waited, what, maybe 20 minutes for the game to even start up?
Yes, it's like the loading time. You might have to hit MS-DOS, like backspace.
Oh,
like
yeah.
slash.
The old school way of getting on computers. I would love to show my kids like an old computer like that. If you've got one here at the school, please let me
Yeah,
borrow
no,
it.
we have some dinosaurs, but no.
Not dinosaurs that old with a big old, what would they, like a 5-inch floppy disk?
Yes. Like, oh, my Lord.
Oh, those would be great.
You had to tape it to like reformat it. You had to cover the little space.
Oh, those were horrible. But they were going to be like the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're just missing the flying cars.
I mean, we're already past the time of the Jetsons.
Yeah.
So, well, if you're hearing that buzzer, it's probably about to get noisy, right?
Yes.
Is that the noise bell?
It is the noise bell. Like all these young people are about to come back from lunch. They're going to walk through here, headed to that far hallway.
Okay, so if we hear some kids like opening up the door saying something, I'm sorry to my audience. These kids are probably going to.
Yeah, that's
they
part
like
of
him, so they're probably going to talk some smack when they open this door and see him with headphones on and a microphone.
Well, and that's part of the boundary. The boundary issues too is they were like, well, just tell them not to do it. And I'm like, they need to feel like they can always come to me.
Exactly, and I appreciate that too. That's why I don't mind if they come in and they want to say hey, say hey.
That's it.
So as far as you've been in law enforcement now for 9 years, right?
Law enforcement for 17.
17 years.
SRO for this is my 9th year.
So what'd you do before law enforcement?
Oh, before law enforcement, oh man, that's a lot.
Let's go back. We're going to go all the way back to like when you were 5 years old. I want to know from there on. Like, give me a daily stats.
No, so immediately before I worked tables. I waited tables in a local restaurant.
That's a really good way to get humbled.
Yes. And let me tell you, so while I was working at Starbucks, I moved back to Arkansas and decided that I wanted to be police. And so I was working at Starbucks every morning from like 5 a.m. until noon or 1. I'd go pick my son up from school, and then I would wait tables in the evenings.
Where'd you wait tables at?
What's now known as Arthur's Steakhouse.
Okay.
When he had Jasmines and Sesames right before he made that upgrade. I worked over there for him, for Jerry.
Nice. How old were you back then?
Like 24, 25.
That was about 50 years ago.
Yeah. Feels like it.
Yeah.
Feels like it. But I was doing that. Just Starbucks that gave me the full-time insurance, had part-time work, and then waiting tables paid the bills.
So why law enforcement? What drove you to the law enforcement side of things?
So I had worked in the private sector for a long time doing retail work.
Mm-hmm.
I managed stores for a company called Buckle.
I know Buckle. Yeah,
Yeah.
all real expensive affliction stuff that everybody used to wear back in the day.
And it was for me, it was the Lucky Jeans. Like,
What were they, like $200 a pair?
They
Oh
felt
my
like
God!
it.
I think I owned like 2 pairs of them, and I was like, I can't buy anything else.
yeah, like the
broke.
discount. Like, oh my gosh! But I thought it was so cool. Like the jeans looked good, and when you undid the zipper, like there was a label on the inside that said "Lucky You." So, anyway, that was really good money, but it was no fulfillment. And so my biggest regret in life has never been that I never joined the military. Mm-hmm. And right before my son was born, I had a store in Dallas, and I was talking to a recruiter because I was going to join up about 23, 24-ish.
Do you know what branch we were looking into?
I wanted to follow his footsteps. I wanted to go Army.
Okay.
My dad was a Ranger in a Green Beret, and I wanted to follow his footsteps. And he said, son, don't be a dumbass, join the Air Force.
Like everybody that's a prior veteran, I would have said the same thing. Just don't do the Army, go to the Air Force.
Yeah.
Much better living.
Yeah, exactly. But so I was listening to him. I was following his guidance, which I should have done more often in life. But so I had taken my test or pre-test or whatever, and scored to the point where the guy was like, man, you can do anything you want to do. Like, let's get you down and get you signed up at the federal building.
Great for a grunt.
Yeah. Yeah. You've got a face for radio. So I was actually meeting him at the federal building down in Dallas to sign the papers. And it was, I don't know why I wore flip-flops that day, but I wore flip-flops. And he was like, oh, they won't let you in
Because of flip-flops.
because of your footwear. You have to be wearing socks and shoes.
Yeah.
And I said, you got to be kidding. And he's like, no, on the military floor, you got to be wearing socks and shoes. And I said, you're sending me home? Like,
'Cause of
don't you have a
flip-flops?
quota? Yeah. Like,
I mean, I've got to do the duck walk here in a little
Yeah.
bit. You're going to tell me to take my shoes off anyway.
it's like talking about like the walk of shame. Like,
Yeah.
And so on the way back, I found out that my son was going to be born. And, you know, I grew up, although I always wanted to be like my dad, you know, there were times where he was gone for months at a time and you didn't get to see him or you didn't know where he was. He couldn't tell you. And, you know, that you could talk to him through a radio. And I just didn't want that life for my son. So the way that I said that I could give back is to become a police officer. If I can't serve and protect overseas, then I'll serve and protect at home. So.
And when you said your dad was in the military, was that when you were a kid, or is that kind of your teenage years? Or
That was from birth until about 19, somewhere
Awesome.
along there.
so pretty much your whole child, it sounds like.
Yes,
In the
for sure.
military.
He was in for 23 years, I think, was his total when
Oh,
he
wow.
retired.
Well, he went the long haul.
Long haul. And he would probably still be in the military if it wasn't for his level of integrity. But,
Yeah.
I
I think you're kind of past that. I mean, 23 years, that's a long time. And I think that's when they kind of start forcing you to get that retirement.
Yeah, well, so I don't know if even I'm allowed to share this, so I might have to call you back later after I talk to my
No,
dad.
we don't have to go into
Yeah.
this.
Well, no, he gave a poor review to somebody, and that somebody had friends back at the main office
So
out there in DC.
political stuff kind of.
Yeah, and they called and they said, hey, we need you to change this. And my dad said, it's not going to happen. I'm not changing it. This is accurate.
Yeah.
And they said, we need you to, or we're going to. And he was like, if anybody changes it, like there's going to be an inquest. So, and then the list came out, and even though he was high, he got passed over for a full bird. So,
Okay, so he was on the officer side.
yes.
Okay. So I remember when we were in the Cropcast, I remember you mentioned at one point that you lived overseas for a little while.
Yes.
Where overseas did you live at?
A lot of sub-Saharan Africa.
That
So-
must have been crazy.
That was awesome. Like, that was really
Like Austin in a good way, or Austin
Yeah,
like really
no.
like, oh, I don't know if I want to turn around.
no.
See this giant snake eating a tiger.
Yes.
Well, not a tiger, because I guess there's not tigers over in
Well,
Africa.
I wasn't going to correct you. It's your show, but yeah. When people are like, "Oh my gosh, did you see bears and tigers?" and I'm like, "Yes, because we were in Asia."
So a snake eating an elephant.
Yeah, like that would be something. That's like one of
Yeah.
them. There's snakes out there this big.
They have nothing compared to Arkansas
No,
snakes.
no, but no, that was wild. So yes, from 14 to 24, I lived in Southeast Africa.
How was that?
It was the best eye-opening experience of my life. I've seen the best and worst that man has to offer. And the fact that one of the countries that we lived in, Mozambique, at the time was considered the third poorest country in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So you see poverty on a level that we just don't see here in the States. And then you see like just tragedies that man does to other man when there's that much poverty, the value of life is very low. So you see a lot. Like I've lived through a military coup. I was there I was in South Africa right after, not long after apartheid ended and Mandela was elected. So
during some real crazy times over there.
yes, like
So does that change your perspective on kind of how things go on here stateside as far as like, I mean, I don't want to get into too many of the details of a lot of stuff. I mean, everybody knows what's going on here in stateside and how people kind of treat different aspects of our quality of living.
mm-hmm.
Coming from or living in another country, because you're not from there, you just lived there for quite a few years, but seeing how things are actually treated over there and seeing how people treat stuff here, does that affect your thought process on how you deal with things now?
Yes, on every level. I am much more grateful for the things that we take for granted every day.
Like running water?
Like being able to drink out of the faucet. I spent 10 years of drinking bottled water or having to have like some decontaminator 2000 XL machine to filter your water and purify it. And, man, just crazy being able to walk down the street. Like there was a place in Mozambique, the presidential palace, that the guards literally have shoot to kill orders. Like if you walk on the sidewalk on that side of the road, you could be shot for no reason. So like it was the first thing that you briefed people on when they came to country was like, don't walk on the side of the road over there. Like if we don't have that fear here, you can walk. Yeah. Well, Little Rock,
different kind of thing.
Yeah. So
we still have laws and stuff that that's broken. Well, you're gonna have to handle it.
No, a big culture shock. Like you take for granted everybody over there is so friendly. And then you come back to places here and like people eyeball you suspiciously for holding the door open for them. Like, it's
wow.
The best example, there was a group from I don't know if you remember years ago, that group from the Sudan, like they sent a whole bunch of youth over, like they lived in Philadelphia or somewhere.
Doesn't ring a bell.
They're a huge group with the Sudanese crisis. They brought a whole bunch of Sudanese men over, and they lived in this community in, I think, Philadelphia. And like they were asking like, what do you feel about, being in America? And they were like people don't, like, it's not easy to talk to people. Like you can't just go over to your neighbor's house and hang out. Like they don't know you. Like, what is this stranger doing here? Yeah. But he said one thing, like it's hard to ask people for directions. And, it's true. Like, you stop somebody in the street here and you're like, hey, can you tell me how to get somewhere? And they're like, well, you got a phone, Google it. Or
yeah, I got something better to do. I don't need to help you.
Right.
Yeah.
Where African people like will literally take you by the hand, no matter what they're doing. They could be walking to work. You ask them how to get somewhere, like to the Walmart or whatever, and they'll grab your hand and they'll start they're like, I'll show you the way. Like, and then they take you. Yeah. Like, it's just, it was a big adjustment coming back, because you didn't have that, and we worked too hard, man. Yeah. Like there you go to work at 9 a.m., you have a 2-hour lunch break, and then you're done by 6, and then everything's closed on the weekends.
Kind of like your old investigations days.
Yeah.
No, we all know how it is for investigators that are working, or detectives in all the cities.
I'm out serving a warrant for the rest of the day.
Never been that.
Yeah. No,
So what took you over to Africa? Why? I mean, if you weren't in the military, I know your dad was, but that's kind of that time frame, I guess you said, when your dad got out of the military as well. What kept you there?
Oh, well, so he got out we spent 3 years in Malawi. Well, my family spent 2 years in Malawi. I spent 2 years there, and then I went to boarding school in South Africa for 2 years. And so when they left Malawi, he was stationed in Mozambique. So my dad was the defense attaché for Malawi, Uganda, and Mozambique. Mm-hmm. And so when he retired, so the connections that he had developed there, the friends, the networking, when people found out he was retiring, they were like, stay here and work for us. And so he worked for a company he was the chief of security for a company that did customs reform projects in third world countries. Okay. And if you imagine going into a corrupt third world country where they're used to taking bribes and stuff at the borders, and then you bring in a company that
isn't going to do that.
And they're going to enforce everything.
It's a difficult transition.
Yeah, and you're not very well liked. So there was a need for someone with my father's capabilities and experience.
Was he with a team, or he's with a company and with a team of people, I'm assuming?
Yeah, he had a team. He had a local team.
Oh, okay. Of all local people, so he's the only one from outside of the country?
Yeah, well, it's a British firm called Crown Agents.
Okay.
But so there were people from the company from Britain or the United Kingdom, depending on how posh you are. But
I'm more of a Baby Spice myself.
Yeah. I like David Beckham, so like I'm gonna be Sporty Spice.
I'm more of a Ryan Reynolds fan. Oh, dreamy.
Don't get me started. Like he's on my celebrity pass list.
my wife says it's so weird. Every time I'm like, look at Ryan Reynolds, I'm like, there's no gay thing about this. It's Ryan Reynolds.
You just don't make eye contact. Yeah.
No, it's Ryan Reynolds. We still do.
I don't want to get off on a tangent. But I took my son to see Deadpool when he was like 14 or 15, and I felt like a horrible parent coming out. And I was like shaking my head thinking, how did you take your son to see this, your juvenile son? And on the way out the door, he was like, you're the coolest dad ever for taking me to this.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah, I was like, oh, squash that. I'm awesome. But anyway, so like but my dad was real big on bringing people up under you. And so one of the ways that you do that, especially in a foreign country, is you only work with local people because you build them up, because when you and this company are gone, you still have the people, I don't want to say...
to hold it up.
Yeah.
Keep up with what you've put in place.
Yeah, and that have, like, they're emotionally invested and they take ownership because it's theirs. It's their country. Mm-hmm. They have a vested interest in the outcome. And so... he's still in communication with most of those people today. So it's really cool. They worked with like Gurkhas. I don't know if you're familiar with Gurkhas.
I've heard the term. I can't think of what it means though.
Oh man, they're the guys that carry the really nasty kukri knives.
Okay, yeah.
And like, so they're from Nepal, and it used to be, it's still like archaic colonialism stuff where when Nepalese men turn 18, like they ship off to the British Army. Uh-huh. And they do their training and serve their time, and then they go back to Nepal. But because they're so efficient and they're so like deadly, and they're sought after all over the world for security forces.
Is that kind of like a Sikh? Kind of similar to that kind of?
No.
The warrior class of that religion, or something similar to that?
Similar.
Okay.
Similar. They, but you know, like those kukri blades that I'm talking about?
Yeah, the ones that are kind of like bent on the end.
Yeah. So I asked the guy, his name was NB Garum. And yeah. Like,
that name just terrifies you.
Yes. In fact, he was at our house one night for dinner, and when we lived in Maputo, and like the phone rings, and so I get up and I go answer the phone, and we always called him Nar. Mm-hmm. Like his first name was Nar. We called him Nar. And the people on this other end of the line, they were like, I speak to Imbi Garum. And I went, you got the wrong number. And I hang up. And I go back to the dinner table, and well, they keep calling. Like, it's about the fourth or fifth time. I'm like, Imbi Garum doesn't live it like this. You got the wrong number. This is the Keller residence, which is how we had to, like, my dad was strict. That's how we had to answer the phone. Like, hello, Eli speaking. There's Keller residence.
Yeah.
And
he instilled that military in
yes. Like, still to this day, I answer my phone. This is Keller.
Eli, you're on staff duty.
Yeah.
For the house.
For that, like, oh my, I'm a pode.
That's horrible that you know that word.
So anyway, I go back and sit down, and my dad finally goes, Eli, like, who's calling? And I said, somebody from overseas asking for Imbi Garum. And Nar looks at me, and he goes, like, smacks his forehead, and he's like, this is me. And I was like, your name's Nar. He's like, the G, Imbi Garum. I'm like, this still doesn't make sense. But
like, I don't get where that's coming from.
Yeah. Well, I worked with my dad and some of those guys for a couple years, and when they found out I was leaving, they had called back to their blacksmith in Nepal and had a kukri made for me.
Oh, nice.
And so he gave it to me. They presented it, and like, really cool. I still got it to this day. It's still as sharp as it was that day.
But not using it for like chopping weeds and stuff out in the backyard with it?
Oh, no.
Not one of those kind of blades?
No, not unless there's like somebody I'm trying to impress.
Look how sharp this is.
Yeah.
Let me go put it back on my stand after this.
Yeah. But I told him, I was like, well, why is the blade curved? And he's like, so you don't have to move your arm all the way around their throat when you cut it. And I said, what? And he's like, yes, energy efficiency.
Like, oh my God. Makes sense.
Yeah. So
different part of the world.
That was my dad's staff, was locals and Nepalese super warriors.
And I mean, for that side of the world, though, I mean, it's a violence of action. It's really crucial to survival. So I mean, that culture is different than our culture. It's not really. It's just a different culture.
It's just different. We call it same, but different.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's kind of like, Nir Maman was teaching us with the whole Israeli special forces hand-to-hand stuff was, like he corrected my punch once because I dipped back a little bit before I swung forward. And he was like, no, never back. He's like, we're surrounded by enemies. He goes, Israel's surrounded by enemies. Everybody's trying to attack you. You can never move back because you hit an enemy. Yeah. So it kind of applies to a lot of those countries. That's what they're.
Yeah, a lot of his, I know there was quite a few of them. I can't remember off the top of my head without looking through that book. But there was quite a few things that he had said that he brought up as examples and kind of compared it to how things are handled in Israel with the terrorists and stuff that they have over there, it was really an eye-opener to a lot of his tactics of that makes sense, and that makes a lot more sense than the stuff I was doing prior. And that eye-opening moment for me was almost a terror moment for me, because I'm like, I was doing it the other way, like the way that I thought was like the best way to do it. And he would point out all the things that I'm like, that he would point them out and say, this is why that's not good. And this is why this could get you killed. And I'm listening to him like, oh, so like, I've survived these years on luck.
Yeah. Like it's just a fluke that I'm able to be here and take this class.
But it makes you feel so much more confident when you leave something like that. And you're like, oh, like I've learned these new things that I hope to apply to myself, is also to apply to other people that I work with, other people in the field, and hey, when I see those things that they're doing, say, hey, maybe try it this way. It may not be the only way to do it, but it's another way that, hey, this might save your life later.
Yeah, for sure.
Try it.
And it was an awesome compliment because, the week prior to that, I had been in Atlanta doing the Gracie Survival Tactics Level 2. And lot of
twisted up like a pretzel.
Yeah. Yeah. So like I got twisted up, joints hurt, and then I got here and like muscles hurt, like covered in bruises. Like I don't have any more spots to rub ligament.
And you got the bruises around your groin from being struck so many times.
Oh my gosh, my groin.
But yeah, that was a great class, and just something fun to do.
It was. And you looked at first when I saw him and he was teaching some of the stuff, I was like, okay, here's a guy who's got to show us how bad he is. Everything's got to be his way. Like, especially when he started talking about the handcuff placement.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, like he just wants our duty belts to look like his duty belt.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the case. It was just that one item. And I had almost judged him before he taught the lesson, but everything made sense. Like it really flowed into...
It was one of those things that he explained it so well and gave reasoning behind it all. So it was like, you really couldn't argue.
No.
My point, I'm trying to make a point on something. I'm like, what I'm saying doesn't even really make too much sense. So it's like, you're on to something there. And I really enjoyed the fact that he was humble about a lot of it too.
Yeah.
And I know he mentioned that multiple times, was like, this, I'm not saying everything is 100%, but this is just a way.
Right.
That was, to me, if you're humble with teaching something like that, you're not just the master coming out saying, you do it my way or you do it no way.
Right.
Or you just quit your job. That I don't like, because then I shut that off and I go, well, there's always room for change. And you always should try to make room for change, because somebody may know something better.
Yeah.
But that was one thing I really enjoyed about that.
I like that. And when I'm teaching defensive tactics to the PD, like I tell the guys, I'm like, this is how I'm teaching it to you, because we teach towards the lowest common denominator. And here's the steps. And once you get good at it, like I'm teaching you 100% of what I know. You take 50% of it and then make 50% of it your own. Like I'm not telling you this is how you have to do it, but this is how we do it for the LCD. Mm-hmm. So like I encourage people, like they say, well, what if I did this? Man, that's awesome. Do me a favor, master this first and then put your spin on it.
Yeah.
And so he kind of did the same thing. It was like, you do what works for you.
Yeah.
Like
You get that basic foundation and build.
Yeah. But I had to take it back straight away too, because we have an officer that's like 6'5". He's like an inch taller than me. And I think he's like pushing 330 right now, or 320.
That's a big old boy.
Yeah. And he does MMA.
Oh,
so
geez.
like the first thing he
even
was
better.
Like, he was like, what do you got? And I broke him down real quick. I was like, let me show you. Like,
and he just like flicked you away, just like, get away from me.
Well, he's very generous. He's like, oh, that's good.
Now let me show you something.
Yeah, no. So,
so how far did he throw you after that?
It was he kept me on the mat, so that was appreciative.
But it was like a 20 by 20 mat.
Yeah, it covers the room, 20 by 24. But I mean, I've been lucky that the police department has fully embraced like all these different teaching methodologies, because the chief invested in a big mat. We've got a huge MMA mat that rolls out 3 pieces, and it's got he put the PD logo on it.
Nice.
And then after the Krav Maga stuff, I didn't want to get hit in the cods, a lot. Trying to be eloquent. So we just got a Century Bob, MMA training done.
When you can kick as many times as you want, it doesn't actually feel
I can actually headbutt him. Like, and so
that's awesome that you guys have that here.
I
think physical fitness, as far as for a first responder, whether police, first firemen, or EMS, just staying physically fit. When we go back to the mental health side of it, it's something about when you work out, and I know there's a lot of science behind it as far as what's going on in your brain, but I know for me, it was probably about a year ago, I just got back on that bug of wanting to work out again. And I've noticed just going every morning, getting a workout in. I know I'm not, in peak physical Greek god condition, but I feel better. And I've noticed it helps me mentally. I feel more clear. I feel more focused. I obviously don't get tired as easily when I'm chasing somebody, which is a big plus. But that clearness of my mind, and I feel happier, which is something I remember prior to when I first started doing investigations, and back even when I was in patrol, I fell into that rut of, I don't really want to work out. I'm taking, all these calls, I'm working all these hours, and I just don't want to work out. So I kind of fell into that rut, and I started to feel crappy about myself. And once you start going down that path, it's hard to break out of it. But once I got to a point where, like I said, about a year ago, I decided I wanted to work out. I got another membership with the gym, started hitting the gym again, started seeing some of the results. And that was like a big turning point for me was, I'm seeing it again. I'm seeing these results. My mental clarity is better. My work, like the stuff I'm working on at work, I feel like I'm actually able to do it a lot clearer. So for me, that was like a big plus. And I can't imagine for somebody that's being a defensive instructor for your agency, that's even a bigger plus, because now you're doing it with your agency. Right. And they're kind of like paying for your mental health in a way by saying, hey, go work out and you're going to feel better. And that's, I think, a big plus. What do you think as far as like with some of the stuff, because you obviously, if you spent overseas, you in Africa, you saw some stuff that when you were over there that you said kind of the bad things that you saw that normally you're not going to forget about those things, and stuff that you've seen in law enforcement that may be a traumatic event that you witnessed, whether it's a car crash, somebody that's been deceased, things of those nature. For me personally, when I think about them, they get brought up. I used to not deal with them best way possible. I used to kind of let it fester and just not talk about it with anybody and just, have our dark humor and our jokes. And I learned that was not the best way to deal with it. These thoughts are coming up. I need to talk to somebody about it, find a way to release that, and try and let my mind actually get clearer. And it took for me talking to a good buddy of mine, who was he is a therapist, and I talked to him and told him, hey, this is what's going on. And he gave me some pointers of, hey, go home, write it down. Like, write down the stuff that you're thinking about. Write down the events that you can't stop thinking about. And I went home, I wrote them down. It hurt. I'm not going to lie to you. It hurt writing them down, and I felt horrible writing that stuff down because it's stuff that I had let sit on from back when I was in the military and now being in law enforcement. And I'm just, okay, let me get this all out on paper. I started writing it down. I broke down many times, just in tears almost, or not almost in tears. I was in tears. But that feeling, once I got it on paper, I took it outside, I said my piece with it, and I lit it on fire. Don't do it right now. We're in a burn ban. If you're in Arkansas, don't do that right now. We're on a burn ban. But when we're off a burn ban, or if you have like a grill that you can put it in and do it safely, do that. But I took it outside. I lit it on fire. And he said, just let the ashes float away. And just look at that piece of paper as that trauma floating away. And try and imagine that weight being lifted from your chest. And it was something about doing that when I lit it on fire and I let it go. And the ashes just floated away. I was like, I still think about it. I still have those thoughts that I think about, but they're not, they don't affect me. They don't have that grasp on me. And I'm always curious about the guys that, especially guys like you. My biggest worry with guys that are happy all the time is, so is Robin Williams. So is a lot of these guys that have gone down that road. And that is a concern for me with somebody that's happy. I know that's not always the case, but I'm curious for you, what do you do that makes you happier, makes you think of those traumatic events and deal with them in a good way?
So, growing up in places like Fort Ord, California, and Fort Bragg, North Carolina, it's a lot of machismo. It's a bunch of high-speed operators. My dad was a Green Beret as far as I can remember. And no matter what you say, like, they're always going to be more elite than the Navy SEALs.
Navy SEALs just get better haircuts. And make movies.
Yeah, and get Rolexes and SIG P226s. But, my dad will tell you, no, our portfolio is more diverse.
We roll it round in the dirt.
Yes. And then my best friend in North Carolina growing up, his dad was a Delta operator. So I was always...
I thought they don't exist.
Yeah. I didn't say that.
They were they were just operators.
Yeah, I meant Delta as in the letter D, like using David platoon. But no, I don't think that it was ever like portrayed to me like we don't have feelings. It was just everybody hid their feelings. It wasn't, you didn't really talk about it. Now my mom, on the other hand, how are you feeling? Like, well, how does that make you feel?
The typical mom.
Yeah. Which is the most healthy version of a parent, is the one that does that. So it's been a real struggle for me up until the last actually year and a half.
Okay.
To even discuss serious feelings. And it's taken a lot of events. I can pinpoint a few of them. I think when the candle first started to be lit, or being prepared to be lit, to cast that light for me, is I went to the dentist because my tooth was really painful. And I'm 45 years old. I've never had a cavity. And so it concerned me that my front tooth was like, and I could tell like it was getting a little discolored. So I go to the dentist and he's like, oh, you've got an abscess. And I'm like, well, that's impossible, because people get abscesses when they have a cavity that gets a filling that gets infected, and I've never had a cavity and it's my front tooth. Like, what's up?
Yeah.
And he said, no. He's like, have you ever experienced any trauma to your tooth? And I said, what, like hurt its feelings? And he looks at me and he's like, no, dummy. Have you ever been hit in the face? And I'm like, yeah.
At least once.
Yeah. He's like, well, like, what do you mean? I was like, well, I've been punched in the face, head-butted, like baseball, whatever. Like, I've been hit in the face a lot.
A rough life.
Yeah. I'm a boy. Identify as a boy.
Oh, we don't need to go down that road.
Okay. And he's like, well, he goes, you could, and this is his words. He said, that tooth could have experienced that type of trauma 20 years ago, and it surfaced recently.
Really?
And I said, you're saying that from getting punched in the mouth 20 years ago, I can have this reaction now?
So a physical trauma to your tooth would not
manifest
for 20 years.
So now when I look back, I'm like, that was the beginning of me understanding, like, trauma.
Comparable to mental health.
Yes. And so, like, on a side note, like he said, they did the procedure and it was supposed to kill the tooth and all that good stuff. I don't know if you know about root canals.
And now you have all dentures.
Yeah.
They look great, by the way.
Thank you. Teeth whitening doesn't work if you have one dead tooth, just so you know. You just have one weird shaped tooth. Anyway. But I don't know if you can hear this. I'm tapping on my tooth. And when I would do that, it would hurt. And so I swear that, like, this dentist who's retired now, Dr. Jolly, I don't know why his name was that, because he was not jolly at all. But I went back to him and I told the receptionist, I was like, hey, I need to talk to him. Like, I've got an issue, it's been a week or two. And he said it was supposed to be like dead. I wouldn't feel anything. Mm-hmm. And so he comes to the waiting room door. He opens it up and he goes, so what's up, Eli? And I said, Doc, like, you said my tooth was dead and I wouldn't feel anything. And he goes, yeah. I said, well, and I'm tapping on my tooth. I said, well, it hurts when I do this. And I swear.
Don't do that.
And he closed the door in my face. Like, those were his exact words. He goes, well, then don't do that. And he closed the door and went back to work.
I mean, that is a funny story, because I actually had a doctor tell me that same thing. On one of my hands, I had broken knuckle. And I went into the doctor's office and I'm like, it really hurts all the time. I'm having really bad. It feels like carpal tunnel. And she's like, well, what is it doing? And I'm like, I made a fist. And I'm like, if you listen, I don't know if you can hear it, but my wrist cracks. I'm like, every time I make a fist, it cracks. She goes, don't do that.
Yeah.
And literally the same thing. Walked right out the room. I'm like, how? That's what?
Yeah. I looked at the receptionist. I said, was that Blue Keller? And she's like, who's that? I said, my dad. Was that my dad?
Did my dad come here and just say, be a man?
Yeah, basically. And so, I always, even from that point, I always prided myself. People were like, man, you never show any emotion on scene. And I worked a lot of dead children, murder, suicide, rape, all the nasty stuff that, first responders see too often. And, I was that guy that literally, and I did a little bit for shock value, I'm not going to lie, but you're at a scene and you recover a shell casing, and then as you're putting it in the bag, you're like, all right, who wants muffin tops from the bakery? And they're like, what's wrong with you? And
that comes back to that dark humor though, of just dealing with it.
Well, we think it's dealing with it.
I mean, yeah, it's part of that though, as far as just that awkwardness, and you think the dark humor is actually what fills that gap or fills the void. And
so, we're going along this timeline. My uncle died in a car wreck, a head-on collision, and we were really close, and it affected me to the point where I actually had some excess water in my ocular region. And
are you saying tears?
Yes. And
I thought you were really going down like a medical term for something. I'm like, I'm really trying to follow.
No, and so I teared up. I shed a couple of tears. I was holding it back. My kids were there, and my son's demeanor immediately changes. And somebody asked him, they were like, what's wrong? And he said, he looked scared. And they said, what's wrong? And this was not that long ago. This is 39, maybe 40 years old for me. And he said, I've never seen my dad cry.
This is your son.
This is my son. He's a teenager. And now when I look back at that, now we have a lot of conversations, but I'm like, how much did I negatively impact my son because I made him think that crying was not manly or was not okay? And to the point where I used to send, if my daughter started crying, she's 12 now. If my daughter started crying, and I couldn't get her under control in the first 30 seconds, I'd go, okay, go cry in your room. Come back when you're done.
I know the feeling. I've got 2 girls of my own, and that's a tough thing because I still deal with it myself. And I mean, even doing this podcast, I know that you got to deal with your emotions, but it's tough.
Yeah, I can barely deal with my emotions. Now I got to deal with her emotions.
Exactly.
I'm hiding all my stuff through humor and a smile, you're
more of an extrovert though, and I mean, I feel like it's kind of an opposite for me. I'm more of an introvert, so if I have something, mine just gets bottled up. And I don't talk about it at all. So.
And I get I'm very outgoing. So when I tell people, I joked around with you earlier, man, I got some anxiety about this podcast. Am I going to tank it? Because I'm genuinely I have so much anxiety and stress because even though I'm so loud, I don't like speaking in public. I don't like giving interviews. And even this morning, I told my fiance, I was like, I'm stressed. Chuck's coming out today. And what if I vomit? What if nobody cares? Or I sound really stupid. And she's like, I don't know why you feel that way.
Yeah, I knew as soon as I asked you to come on the show, I'm like, he's going to be fine. Eli, you've got that attitude and that demeanor of you. I'm like, God, he would be better at this than I would. He's going to make me sound horrible.
That's not true. That couldn't be possible. Might make you look bad, but won't make you sound bad.
I don't know about even looking bad. I'm pretty hot myself.
Yeah.
That's what my wife tells me.
I need your wife to have higher standards. but she's a social worker. So she is real big on mental health and validating feelings. And so now when my daughter starts crying and we can't get under control, I say, well, sweetie, how did we get here? And instead of saying you cry too much, because as my fiance Mary would say, she'd go, well, what's your baseline for too much? Like if I say somebody's too sensitive, she's like, well, what's your baseline for sensitivity? Like maybe you're not sensitive enough.
I kind of played that back.
Yeah. So now
Which
the
is not a bad
conversation
thing.
with my daughter is on the lines of like, well, darling, you have really big emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So try to calm yourself and tell me what we're going through. Like, let's work through this. So it's been a journey, but I had
Have you noticed a change in yourself and how you deal with things?
I have, and that's because I had some triggering events last year. And, one of the things too was early in the year last year, my son told his girlfriend at the time, she said, you're just so neutral. And he's like, what do you mean? She's like, well, you don't talk about your emotions. And I heard it said, like, he said, well, I'm a Keller. We push them down and we use humor to cover it. And I was like, that's my boy. And my fiance was like, that's not okay.
You need to go talk to him right now.
Yes. And she's like, but don't tell him I told you to. So I had some triggering events, and people are going to laugh, but I got some really good advice from Dr. Owen Hunt. He was a trauma surgeon on Grey's Anatomy.
The look you were giving me, I'm like, where is the punchline?
Yeah,
I know it's coming, and why am I not getting this?
So he said, and I know it's TV and it's make believe, but it made sense to me that they were talking about talking to therapists and therapy, and we do wellness checkups with our doctor every year. So
And this is through your agency, or is this just through your?
No,
personal
I'm
stuff?
just saying, like, we as people,
Okay.
we do wellness. We do a wellness checkup,
Uh-huh.
right, at the doctor. You go in to brief physical, like they take your labs.
Yeah.
You go to the dentist once every 6 months for a cleaning and preventative care, but nobody goes to a therapist or a mental health professional when they're not in crisis, or so that they don't end up in crisis.
Yeah.
And so it was a bunch of those, like the stuff with my son and my daughter and everything that, the episode of Grey's where they said that kind of led to me thinking, you know what, it is okay. But I had some triggering events last year, and to the point where like I was super emotional. Like I still wasn't I didn't really cry about stuff at all, but I found myself like crying over things. And I'm okay saying that. Like, it doesn't, like I see now, it doesn't make me less of a man because I have emotions. It doesn't make me less of a man because I cry or shed tears. And I went to EAP through the department. My lieutenant hooked me up. He's former military.
What is EAP?
EAP, Employee Assistance Program.
Okay.
I used them as a headway into talking to a licensed therapist. And it was very discouraging in the beginning because I went in and I bore everything to this therapist, and she didn't mean it in a bad way, but I took it negatively. As she said, at the end of our hour, she said, I'm just going to be real with you. You get 6 sessions through your city or through your employer, and we're not going to scratch the surface in those 6 sessions.
That's kind of a tough thing to hear, but it's also not a bad thing to hear because now you know, hey, there's more to unpack here, and I'm obviously not going to unpack this in 6 hours.
Right. But what I heard was, you're so screwed up that I can't help you in the allotted time. Like I was still being negative about it.
Yeah.
But you're 100% correct. Like that was she was doing me a favor so that I didn't go through another 6 hours just to have to start over with somebody else and go through it all again.
Yeah. And that would be even harder too, because now you've got to tell all these horrible things to a new person and hope they understand where you're coming from.
Right.
And that's, I can relate to that because when I first went to go see a therapist, when I was having some of the same triggering events as well, my therapist actually said the same thing. He's like, hey, this is gonna be a bit. Like you've got some stuff prior to the military, some stuff from just how you were brought up. You've got things from military, and you've got things from law enforcement, and we need to kind of unpack all that. And it's going to be unpacking one box at a time, and really figuring out exactly what's in that box, what needs to be handled, and how you handle with it. And that, for me, I remember leaving the therapist office, going home, talking to my wife, and I was like, I don't want to do this. I was like, I don't want to unpack these boxes. I'm like, I packed them away. I put them in storage. Yeah. They're locked up tight. I put extra bolts on them, and I put a cinder wall block in front of it.
Yes, like I spent a lot of time and effort putting these things away.
Exactly. And I'm like, I feel fine. I just had this one issue. I wanted that one issue handled with, and that's all I wanted to deal with. And that was the conversation when I had it with my wife, and I'm sure you probably had something very similar with your wife as well. Was, no, it's more than that. And it's not just one event that causes those triggering events. It's a collection of all of them. And the best way my wife explained it to me, because I brought up the analogy of the boxes and packing the boxes away, and they're in there. And she goes, well, what happens if you had, let's just say every time you had something traumatic happen and you had, say, a bucket of wax, and you just think of that bucket of wax that's sitting in there, and it's a hot storage unit that has no AC, and you start packing on.
All right, thank you. I think he can edit that out.
Yeah, I can edit that out later, or he might even just leave it in there. But yeah, when she said, so if you took those buckets of wax, put them inside of a storage unit, and you just think of it in like 100-degree heat outside. If you start piling those in there, eventually you're going to get so much that's piled in there, those buckets are going to start getting heavy with all the weight of all of them. All it takes is one of those to bust. One of those buckets of wax to bust, and now it gets over everything. And it's going to ooze out. And that's when you're going to have to open it up, and they're all going to fall out. And that when my wife told me an analogy that was similar to that. Okay.
That's the acting chief.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay, I'll be right there.
Well, I appreciate you, Eli, for coming on the show.
Man, Chuck, I really appreciate you coming out and talking with me. Let me share a little bit. I'm sorry we got to cut it short. But
no problems. I understand. So, hey, that's how the job is.
And I like to normalize men telling other men that they love them. So I love you, bro.
I love you, too. It was great to have you on. I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
We will. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
We would like to thank our guests for being with us today, and a special shout out to all the first responders who rise to the challenges of the job every day. You are our heroes. Please like, follow, and subscribe to our Facebook pages, Heroes Behind the Line and Be the Hero Podcast. If you have an interesting story and would like to be a guest on the show, please reach out to us on Facebook. As always, be the hero and stay safe out there.